Okay guys, welcome to your last set of Cornell notes for the year. I know, dry your eyes. You're all very upset. I know you're going to miss it next year. But we're talking today about the American Civil War, which is America's bloodiest war. In fact, if you add up all the deaths from all the other American wars, it comes close to equaling the deaths just from the American Civil War. Okay, so looking at the first thing here, just to write another map, right? So the green states here are the free states, the blues the territories, and the red down here is the Confederate states. This map does not show the border states that we talked about. It also includes, South Dakota and Nevada, which is kind of iffy. They come in sort of toward the end of the war. Okay, in the beginning, guys, nobody knew this would be the bloodiest war in American history. In fact, a lot of people thought the exact opposite. This would be a very quick, easy war. So, when understanding the two sides, guys, you need to really understand the terms, because we throw a lot of terms out there. So, judging by the North, right, the northern states, that's called the Union. Sometimes they're called the Yankees. The president is Abraham Lincoln. That's his picture, and there's the American flag at the time. The South, the southern states, the Confederacy, sometimes they're called the Rebels, okay, and that is Jefferson Davis is the president. And there's the official Confederate flag. There's a bunch of other flags that we talked about in class, right, but that's the official Confederate flag. All right, so, like I just said, which one is not one of the official Confederate flags? Okay, and if you remember from class, right, this one's an official flag, this is a naval flag, this is an official flag, right? This right here is the state flag of Mississippi. I believe it's not an official Confederate flag, no. Okay, and to start things off, let's watch this quick little video clip.
He's probably the smartest person ever to be president. And his learning curve is amazing.
He had his beliefs, and he stuck to his beliefs at a time when it wasn't popular to do so.
And at all of our crisis times, we've needed leaders who were just a little bit better. But Lincoln was really that good.
The essential thing to remember about Abraham Lincoln was there was nothing in his background that predicted that he was going to be president of the United States. And in fact, if Lincoln had not been elected in 1860, almost no one ever would have heard of him. He was an accomplished lawyer, and he made a name for himself as an anti-slavery orator in the late 1850s. But even at his election, no one expected great things of Abraham Lincoln.
He was a man who became president at maybe the worst moment in our country's history.
At the beginning of the war, at the beginning of his running, Lincoln did not advocate black equality.
Lincoln's principal objective was to save the Union, and then we'll deal with slavery. Before too long, he had to both save the Union and deal with slavery through the Emancipation Proclamation.
He was a man who very reluctantly was sort of taking on the issue of slavery. He really did not want to. If you read any literature, he never really wanted to embrace the slavery issue. It wasn't his issue. And yet he sort of, over a couple of conversations with Frederick Douglass, and really over time, came around to embracing that issue.
By 1864, is the best commander on either side. He understands the entire strategy of the war on a continental basis. He understands how to use the Navy. His orders to Grant are impeccable. Lincoln is, in the truest sense, the commander-in-chief.
By the end, Lincoln had totally grown to where he said that not only should blacks not be slaves, they should be treated as equal citizens with full enfranchisement, right to vote, right to participate. So Abe Lincoln was a person and president in progress. And the Lincoln that was assassinated was not the Lincoln that was first inaugurated.
Even after his election and his inauguration, there were long moments when Americans could say, what have we gotten ourselves into? Why did we choose this guy? Does he have the ability to rise to the challenge? The mythology of Lincoln all occurs, well, after his election, after his inauguration, and in particular, after his assassination.
The tragedy of his assassination, which unfortunately, that's what I think has helped create the martyr that he became.
He becomes Father Abraham. He becomes, for the next 2 generations, he becomes the personification of the American belief in liberty.
You won't be able to get anybody to agree on who a great president is, except Abraham Lincoln. I don't think you'd find an American who wouldn't say that he wasn't the greatest president.
Okay, so let's go ahead and sort some of these terms here. So Abraham Lincoln obviously was on the side of the North. The rebels would have been the South. Lee, we'll talk about in a minute, we should know from class, was a general in the South. Grant was the big general in the North. Yankees was the term associated with people from the North. Jefferson Davis was the president of the South, right? Washington, D.C. was the capital of the North. The Confederacy was what we called the states in the South, right? The Union's what we called the states over here in the North. Cotton was the big economic powerhouse in the South, whereas industry was the big economic powerhouse in the North. Richmond was the southern capital, and of course we said that this was the official Confederate flag, and this is the flag of the United States. Okay, so just a quick little sort there. Keep those things in mind as we go through, because it's important to know these. Okay, let's look at some of the advantages of the North and the advantages of the South at the outbreak of the Civil War. So in the North, right, the advantages, there was a much larger population. I think it was 23 million versus, I think, 4 or 5 million. So the North had this huge amount of people compared to the South actually living there. All the big cities were in the North. Chicago, Washington, Boston, New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, all of them are northern cities. There was more industry. The factories and things were all located in the North. They had a better banking system in the North to raise money. They had more ships. They had all the ships, really. The U.S. Navy stays in the hands of the North throughout the entire war. They had the better railroad system, right? A majority of the railroads were in the North, and not only that, the railroads were much more interconnected in the North. This allows for the North to move troops faster and more strategically. It allows them to move goods and supplies, right, as well as weapons. So all those things are enhanced by this better railroad system. Also, guys, the North has Lincoln's intelligence and skill, something that shouldn't be underestimated when we talk about advantages and disadvantages of the North and the South. Disadvantages, they would have to invade the South and hold the South. Okay, so it's just not a matter of winning more battles, it's about a matter of changing the minds of the people who are living there. Many thought that the South would win, so there was kind of this mentality of if people want a revolution, right, they want to break away, there's nothing you can do, eventually they'll end up doing it. In the South, the advantages was there was a strong support for the war. People really supported the war in the South. Troops were fighting on their own land, they had home field advantage. There was superior military leadership, right? Stonewall Jackson, Braxton Bragg, General Robert E. Lee, those were all the big names in military fighting at the time, and they were all fighting for the South. Disadvantages, they had the smaller population, fewer factories, fewer resources. They had beliefs that the states should have more power, and therefore that led to kind of a lack of communication and things like that sometimes when it came to war efforts. So the war begins, and it begins in Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is a Union fort that's located in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. That's a current day picture of it. You can go there and they give tours still. The South fired on the fort, right? After 3 days, the Union surrendered it. Okay, so eventually the North says, you know what, we can't take this bombardment anymore. We're just going to turn this fort over to the Confederates. President Lincoln called on troops to fight in the South. He said, look, here's an example. We need people to enlist, right? The rebels are taking our forts, right? Our federally owned forts. In the South, this battle convinced Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, and Arkansas to join the Confederacy. So now the number of Confederate states total 11. So there's 11 Confederate states. 15 slave states, but 11 Confederate states. Because remember, the 4 border states do not switch sides. Okay, which is one advantage of the South in the war? Was that they had a bigger population, they had more railroads, they had better military leaders, they had more ships. Okay, A, B, and D are both advantages of the North, and C was the advantage of the South. Okay, so the war begins in Bull Run. The first real battle where it was head-to-head combat was this Battle of Bull Run. Civilians came out to watch the battle. They go sit on the field up on a hill. They bring their picnic lunches, right? A bunch of senators and congressmen from Washington, D.C. I think it's going to be a beautiful day. Let's go watch this battle, this war pretty much begin and end quickly on the same day. But what they don't realize is the Confederates had a lot of troops, a lot more than the North anticipated, right? And so the Confederates actually end up with the upset, and they beat the Union troops. When the Union troops fled, they actually kind of, form a little stampede and run over those people who came out for their nice picnic. So the civilians fled with them. This causes pride in the South. Look, we won. We're going to win this war. The North doesn't know what hit them. And the North just gets angry and calls on more troops and more rallying behind this war. Which is not true about the Battle of Fort Sumter. It's where the war began. It convinced more states to join the Confederacy. It convinced Lincoln to call for more troops. It had over 200 deaths. Okay, and if we look at Fort Sumter, nobody actually died in the battle, so D is the correct answer. Okay, so some of the major players. In the North, right, the big generals was Ulysses S. Grant, William Sherman, George Meade. Okay, McClellan was another one. McClellan's actually demoted and Ulysses S. Grant gets put in his place. Let's see, in the South, there's Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Braxton Bragg. There's several more in the South. Longstreet we talked about. So there's more for each side, but these are some of the big major players. This is a picture of Lee. This is a picture here of Grant. Grant becomes the 18th president of the United States. Okay, so the battle plan. The North creates a three-step plan, we also call it the Anaconda Plan, to defeat the rebels. Step 1, take control of the Mississippi River. If you do that, you're going to split the Confederacy in two. You have part of it over here and part of it over here, and you're also going to cut off their supply lines, right? They depend on this river, especially because they don't have a lot of railroads. The next step was to blockade the southern coast and cut off the cotton trade. Anytime there's a port in the South, right, take our Union ships and we're going to blockade the port, prevent them from trading and going back and forth, okay? You want to take over the southern capital of Richmond, Virginia, right here, right? Take over the capital, cripple the government, stop the Confederacy from functioning. So we're going to divide them in half, right? Prevent their trade, which gives them money, and kill their government by taking over the capital. That is the three-step Anaconda Plan. Eventually, guys, they do all three steps. Some of them are much easier than others. Okay, so War in the West, Battle of Shiloh. The Union barely wins this battle in this two-day battle. There were 20,000 casualties on both sides. Shiloh, combined with a few other victories, including Vicksburg, that we talked about in class, by General Grant, propelled him to fame and led the Union to control the Mississippi River and Tennessee. Right? New Orleans is another strategic victory. Every war, guys, fought on American soil. New Orleans was a strategic battle because it was an important city that controlled the flow of the Mississippi River, right? What's going in and out of the Mississippi. So Grant scored another important victory at the Battle of New Orleans. The North now controlled the entire Mississippi River and cut the South in half, just as they had planned. Okay, so here's a little picture of where Shiloh is located, right? This is Tennessee, the Mississippi River, and there's the Battle of New Orleans in the Civil War. Okay, which is not one of the part of the North's three steps plan. Capture Richmond, blockade the South, burn all the southern cotton fields, capture the Mississippi River. Okay, and the answer for this one is C, right? Burning the cotton field is not part of the three-step plan. Okay, here's some battles in the East that are important. Antietam. Antietam is in Maryland. It is a one-day battle that is the single bloodiest day in U.S. history. 17,000 injured and 6,000 dead. Lee fled, so that way the North actually ends up claiming victory. Now, whether or not they deserve that, we don't really know because it's pretty much a tie, right? Remember, there's the word tie in the middle of Antietam, so it's kind of the tie. Fredericksburg, if you want to add Chancellorsville, they're kind of the same campaign, right? They're just a few days apart. They kind of go together. It's in Virginia. That's a big Southern victory. And the thing that happens there that's of note is that Stonewall Jackson is killed by friendly fire. Okay, that's one of the big Confederate generals, and he doesn't make it. Sherman's march is the other big thing that happens in the state of Georgia. General Sherman marches with his troops from Atlanta, Georgia to Savannah, Georgia. He burns cities, rips up railroad tracks, right, and ransacks homes in his path. They even burn convents, churches, everything inside, right? Doesn't matter. They take the railroad tracks, heat up the rails, and kind of bend them around trees, and they call them Sherman's neckties. They look like little ties around trees. Though this is to kind of break the South's will to even want to fight the war. They're purposely being brutal so that the Southerners will say, you know what, this war isn't worth it anymore. We don't even want to fight anymore. Let's just go back to the Union. Okay, here's the path of Sherman's troops as they march through Georgia, right? Atlanta's up here, Savannah's down here. This is them burning some cotton fields. That's General Sherman, the Northern troops himself, or General himself. And there's the railroads that they're ripping up. Okay, so just more pictures. This, guys, is a video of one of the side effects that comes out of the Battle of Antietam, which is the Emancipation Proclamation, which we talked about in class. Hugely important, guys. It'll definitely be on upcoming tests, things like that. So pay attention to the video, right? This is Lincoln using the Battle of Antietam to say, you know what, now's the time. We are going to free the slaves. Go ahead and watch the video.
The most important political turning point in the Civil War is the Emancipation Proclamation. It's the point at which general emancipation of all slaves within those regions still in rebellion is announced as Union policy. And that is what really marks the transformation of the Civil War into the Second American Revolution.
Is the point where it becomes not a war for union, but a war to end the institution of slavery.
Emancipation became an issue that many more people thought about and many more people understood was important.
It sort of forces the nation to confront what's at core, fighting to try to create the freedom for people who are enslaved in the South.
First of all, it throws the South into chaos because it makes enslaved people understand that they now have freedom. It's been given to them by the president. They can't act on that freedom, of course, unless they make their way to the Union lines or unless the Union military meets them halfway. But they are now declared free. They know that. And so they're willing to make the effort now.
And I think for African Americans, it says finally it's now our chance to really join in and be a part of this. And to those who are enslaved, it says in fact, when these Union troops do come near us, that we have a chance to gain our freedom.
What the proclamation also does is it makes it possible for African American men to serve in the Union Army.
And in all, something almost 200,000 African Americans volunteered and fought in the Civil War.
And actually, he needed them to fight because it certainly was a war of attrition, and they needed black men to help them win.
Out of those African Americans who participated as soldiers, 16 received the Congressional Medal of Honor. I mean, they were tremendously significant in the struggle of the Civil War.
Now, of course, the story of that proclamation is just not one day, January 1st, 1863. There's a long run-up to the Emancipation Proclamation.
But that was really the turning point. After that, it was like a domino. And Lincoln knew it didn't matter what caveats he put in the Emancipation Proclamation, that this group wasn't free or that this didn't apply here. It didn't matter. Once that die was cast, then he knew that almost on its own, it would simply unfold itself. And that's exactly what happened.
Okay, so Gettysburg. Gettysburg is the biggest battle of the Civil War, right? It's really the biggest battle in American history. Here, Robert E. Lee decides, he's winning a couple battles here and there, he decides, we have momentum. Let's take that momentum and invade the North. So he's planning on going to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, but on the way, right, there's a skirmish in a small town of Pennsylvania. Now, the story goes that 2 cavalry units, intersected there. It was over, one of them went into town to buy shoes, and the fight, escalated from there, which led to this huge battle. But either way, they're on their way to Harrisburg. The cavalry units, 2 units of people on horses met up in Gettysburg, so that's where the battle ends up taking place. Gettysburg's a small town in Pennsylvania. It's a really pretty place. There's lots of hills around and a small little village at the base of all the hills. So the battle became the largest in the Civil War. Lee was forced to retreat when he marched his troops across an open field. This is known as Pickett's Charge. So General Pickett marches his troops across an open field. Remember, the Union people are on the tops of the hills in Gettysburg, which gives them a much better defensive position. So as the Southern troops march across the field, they are pretty much sitting ducks. It's a really open target, and they are kind of picked off one by one. I think something like 2/3 of them in Pickett's Charge are killed or wounded, and pretty much this stops the advance of the Confederacy invading the North. They are forced to retreat back into the South. It's a huge loss for Lee and a huge win for the North. So the 3-day battle ends with 51,000 dead, wounded, or missing. That's about 700 people an hour. Wow, right? That's a lot. The Union victory crippled the South, right? And Lee really was shamed. He kind of talks, says this is his biggest failure as a war leader, is this battle. Today you can tour Gettysburg. There's lots of memorials and tombstones, things like that. You can see where some of the action took place, and on each day how that fighting kind of moved from one location in the town to another. Okay, so at the end of the war, a couple months after, well, before we get to the end of the war, a couple months after the Battle of Gettysburg, Lincoln comes to Gettysburg, right, to make an address, right, which is known as the Gettysburg Address, which becomes really his most famous speech. He decides that he's going to dedicate the cemetery in Gettysburg to all the fallen troops. His speech is only about 3 minutes long, and its focus is on a post-war America and on rebuilding America. This is, like I said, his most famous speech, and I'm going to show you a quick little video, guys, that's going to demonstrate just how powerful this speech is. This is the exact speech.
Fourscore 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or try. The world will little note, no longer remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth.
Okay, so that's a good video, I think, that shows his most famous speech. So now let's talk about the South surrendering. Robert E. Lee requests to meet Ulysses S. Grant in April of 1865 to discuss terms of surrender. They met at a courthouse in Appomattox, Virginia. Both generals signed, and the war was pretty much over. Now, what's of note about this is that Grant allows them to keep their horses and even gave them a few days' worth of food. Now, the reason behind this is because they didn't want there to be a grudge, right? They wanted these two people of the same country to kind of move forward. Let's not hold a grudge. Let's not keep this going, right? We're going to treat them kindly and fairly so that we can make this horrible war a thing of the past. Let's move forward, right? We have to come back together as one nation, so let's offer a peace offering. It's kind of a way to forget about the past. Okay, which is not true about the Battle of Gettysburg. Lincoln made a famous speech there. It lasted for 5 days. It began when the South invaded the North. It was the bloodiest battle in the war. Okay, and we know from the notes that it lasted for 3 days, not 5, so the answer is B. Okay, did I skip one? All right, so let's sort the following quickly. The Union destroys most of Georgia. That's Sherman's march to the sea. The Union takes control of the Mississippi River, right? That is the Battle of New Orleans. The single bloodiest day in U.S. history would be Antietam. The battle with the most deaths would have been Gettysburg. The location of the South surrender is Appomattox, and the first battle is Bull Run. Okay, now comes Reconstruction. The era of Reconstruction, right, deals with after the Civil War, and it talks about when the South, really the whole nation, has to rebuild, right, reconstruct our society, our country. So now comes the daunting task of rebuilding the South and bringing the two sides together. Lincoln is not alive for much of the Reconstruction period because on April 14th, right, just 5 days after the South surrendered, he is killed by John Wilkes Booth at the Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. And what you may not know is that this was just a small part of a much larger assassination plot that included both the Vice President and the Secretary of State. Those two plots don't work out, but unfortunately the one to kill Lincoln does. Americans were devastated in both the North and the South by this assassination, right? People in the South didn't really agree to the fact that this person was basically murdered. All involved in this plot were eventually tracked down and killed, including a woman named Mary Surratt, who's the first woman the U.S. government ever puts to death. But Lincoln's funeral lasts for days. His body's put on a train. It goes through a lot of the northern states where people will stand on the side of the train tracks and salute or cry or whatever as the body went by. This would have been a huge deal at the time, something that we still remember pretty vividly today in our history books, in pop culture, in everything, basically. Including in a Hollywood movie that shows the assassination of Lincoln that I'll show you now because I think it's a pretty good representation of it. So here's another video. which is not true of the Lincoln assassination. Was that it happened in a theater, he was killed by John Wilkes Booth. It was part of the larger assassination plot, or that it happened 4 days after the war ended. Okay, this one is a little bit cheap because really it happened 5 days after the war ended. So, let's sort the following pictures. Right here we have Robert E. Lee. Here we have Jefferson Davis. Here we have General Sherman. And then we have Grant. Lincoln is here. And John Wilkes Booth is this man right here. Okay, now, 3 constitutional amendments were passed that dealt with slavery in African Americans after the war, this Reconstruction period. The 13th Amendment, which bans slavery in the U.S. and territories. The 14th Amendment, which defines citizenship and grants equal protection under the law for all citizens. And the 15th Amendment, which gives citizens the right to vote regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, meaning even if they used to be slaves. So in phases, the southern states were brought back into the Union. Okay, so first, this and this state was brought in, then this and this state was brought back in, then this and this state was brought back in. In your notes, guys, it is really important that in your margins you write these out. So I'm going to be looking for that on notebook checks. So please make sure you just briefly tell me, even if you want to shorten these a little bit, right? The 13th Amendment did this, 14th did this, 15th did this. Okay? Okay, which amendment gave African Americans the right to vote? And we should say African American men, yes. So, that is the 15th Amendment. Okay, that concludes our notes. Don't forget your margins, main ideas, reflections, keywords. That's it, guys. You are done for the year with Cornell notes. So thank you for doing this throughout the year, and hopefully you guys will remember all this in your lifetime. Thank you.